Much. Okay, you're up.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you to all of you for coming. And thank you to Sandy's family and to David Yari and his family. And it's really special to be here with you today. I would like to also dedicate my talk because my mother passed away 2 years ago today on the civil calendar. It was on the Jewish calendar. The yard site is the second day of Pesach, which is very complicated because I don't want in America to have to go to shul when I don't keep a second day. So I am going to move that up to this coming Thursday night, Friday day. The rabbi said that was okay, but my mother was born in Palestine, in Jerusalem, in January 1948. Yeah, so she was born there. Yeah, so
my sister was born in 48.
Yeah, okay. So my grandparents lived above Mayan Stub at King George and Yafo. Raised their 5 daughters there, and we always heard this story about how when my mother was a baby, at one point during the War of Independence, there was an explosion, and because my grandmother had put a blanket over her moments before, the glass that shattered from the window did not harm my mother. And over time, we've researched what exactly happened. It turns out the explosion that they're talking about was the British attacking the Palestine Post, few blocks away. And it was a really powerful explosion that really, it did make windows shatter that far away. In fact, that window was never properly even repaired. It's still that messed up after all that time. It turned out it wasn't really a blanket, it was more chicken wire or some blankety thing that they did back then. But I found it amazing that the Jerusalem Post tried to kill my family before I was even born. And here I am today, and I've now been writing for them for 25 years. I had an internship in the summer of '98 at the Jerusalem Post. And so this is my 25th year writing for them. And in between, in 1999, the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, where I went, had this program called Teaching Newspaper that sets up juniors or seniors with media outlets around the country to gain some experience while we're still in school. And they had deals with newspapers and media all over America, but I persuaded them that as an observant Jew, the only place that I could go and observe my religion properly was to go to Florida in the wintertime, leaving Chicago behind. And so I came here to Hollywood, and I wrote for the Broward edition of the Herald, and I stayed with Moshe and at the time Julie Averbach, and who both took wonderful care of me, and I've kept in touch with both of them as they've gone in the directions that they have, and their families and everything. And I was very thankful to Rabbi Davis back then and to the entire community for taking such good care of me as a 18-year-old kid. And here I am, I turn 45 next week. So it's not just coming full circle to the place where I tried to speak the day that the pandemic began. It's also coming full circle for me from when I was 18 years old, coming here from my first time away from home. So I'm here to talk about what Israel is going through. When I first organized this talk, the topic was peace, politics, and the pandemic, an insider's look into how Israel overcomes the world's challenges. And I can only dream of what it would have been like if that was really what I talked about. Instead, after a while, I was sent to the border of Ukraine, and it became peace, politics, Putin, and the pandemic. an insider's look into how Israel overcomes the world's challenges. Over the course of this trip, it has become peace politics, piguim, terrorist attacks, Putin, and the pandemic. And we've had our share of extra politics thrown in there to make it even more challenging. So I do start by talking about the pandemic, and there are different points of views about how Israel has overcome the pandemic. At the very beginning, we were the first country to shut down. We were the first ones to realize the enormity of the situation. The fact that I really went to an empty house for 14 days when I came home from that trip to Florida shows how seriously we took it before anybody else in the world did. Obviously, there were a lot of mistakes that were made along the way, but over time we learned. We learned how to handle the pandemic smartly with vaccinating early and often. We were the first ones who realized when the vaccines had waned and when we have to start vaccinating again. We learned how to handle it without shutting down our economy and move on living within the pandemic, which is, of course, what Florida did all along. It took us time to realize how to learn to be like Florida, but we did. I'd like to credit the Israeli experience with dealing with crises for how, in the long run, we ended up okay. The spirit of the people of Israel, the discipline that we've learned from having so many crises in the past, led Israel into, in the end, being all right. And the unity, let's not forget, we've got the Seder coming up 2 years ago when we were under lockdown. We all went out on our porches and sang the Manishtana together in a beautiful kind of way. So I see that as a thinking outside the box kind of way that Israel has succeeded against all odds. Feel free to disagree. Same thing goes with the Abraham Accords. Look, all along, we've been told for decades, the way you make peace is that you wait for the Palestinians to make the sacrifices necessary to help their own people, and the world puts a tremendous amount of pressure on Israel to give up very serious assets that could result in our imminent destruction. And we need to appreciate those who change that way of thinking, mainly two people, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed, and the Crown Prince of America, Jared, your neighbor here in Florida, who realized it doesn't have to be that way, that you don't have to wait for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to be solved to make people's lives better. The Crown Prince, MBS, he screamed at the Palestinian leaders, we're sick and tired of not improving the lives of our own people because of you, because you're not making those sacrifices necessary to help your own people. Our people would benefit from having official relations with Israel, with a top economic and technological power. That's the country closest to the President of the United States. Now, he himself could not do that, being the Crown Prince and not the king, but the king has either Alzheimer's or what's the word that starts with dementia. And his time is limited. And then they'll join the Abraham Accords too. But meanwhile, at least their allies in the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco could do it. I went to Dubai, felt very comfortable there. I encourage everyone to go. It's great. I'm from Chicago. I like tall buildings. I don't know if I can say this, but when people asked me what my impression was immediately after being there, I said, oh, it's just like Chicago, but without the Arabs. It's true. There's very, very small Arab and Muslim population of natives actually in the United Arab Emirates. You've got a lot of Indians, a lot of people from all over, but they're not the native Muslim people.
Sorry to interrupt you before you get off the other topic.
Yeah.
Is anti-vaxxers very popular in Israel?
Not at all. You know, I think it's an important thing to bring up, even though I'd rather have the interruptions only at the end, which is that it never became a political issue in Israel the way it did in America. Everyone pretty much united, this is the right thing to do, and we've done it. What the Abraham Accords did that was most exciting for me as a political analyst was they showed the Israeli Arab population that they don't have to wait either. Mansour Abbas said hey, if they're not waiting anymore in the United Arab Emirates, why are we waiting here in Nazareth to help our own people? That widened the amount of members of Knesset who can join a coalition, made it easier to end a political crisis that began back in December of 2018. In December of 2018, I was looking forward to the 24th of December, because on the 24th of December, the Knesset speaker had announced we would finish the proceedings of the Knesset early in honor of Christmas. There are Christian members of Knesset, but he forgot that all Christian members of Knesset are Orthodox Christians and therefore celebrate Christmas on the 7th of January. And so the only one who was going to be benefiting from this decision was going to be me, because I celebrate my American Jewish heritage by going to a movie and eating Chinese food that night. And that was the day that Netanyahu announced that he would be moving our election up. That it was supposed to be in November. He moved it up to April 10th of 2019. And here we are on April 10th of 2022, exactly 3 years from when all the headaches began, from when we started having elections that proved Einstein's theory of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and expecting a different result. And it really bothers me when people like Tom Friedman write that Israel is going through the same thing America is going through, of hyperpolarization. Not true. We actually have a stronger consensus on diplomatic, security, and economic issues than we've ever had before. Those elections were not about diplomacy, security, or economy. They were about one overused Shakespearean cliche of to be or not to be. That has been the only question. And as long as you have a majority of people on this paper and in the public who agree with Netanyahu's policies but don't want him to stay, then we will continue to have political chaos. That's not going to change anytime soon. I'll tell you a quick story. I work out in the Knesset gym, and throughout my time, more than 20 years working out in that Knesset gym, I've never seen someone allowed to work out on the treadmill without headphones. Everyone has to use headphones, except for one person, Netanyahu, whether he was prime minister or not, has been allowed to watch his Fox News very loudly while he runs. During the pandemic, our gym closed, just like everybody else's gym around the world, and reopened with limitations. We can only use every other treadmill. So Netanyahu, he runs a lot. And we're sitting there waiting for him to finish. And he keeps running. And the other people waiting with me give up. And I'm the last one waiting for him. And I start texting Gidon Saar, Yuli Edelstein, your Barkat, saying, Netanyahu just keeps running and he won't stop. I finally know how you feel. And they send me back very cute emojis with funny eyes. It's not going to change. I can tell you, in my 25 years almost of covering politics in Israel, I have never seen a greater discrepancy between the way politicians speak publicly and privately than Likud MKs about Netanyahu. If you talk to them publicly, they sound like Christian evangelicals talking about Jesus. And if you talk to them, the same people, privately, and they trust you, they sound like Christian evangelicals talking about the devil. So we thought, though, that there were three things that made our politics finally stable. Number one was Mansour Abbas. Number two was something that happened in 2012. In 2012, I was covering an election for a small party called Bayit Yehudi. They had three people running, two of which are above the age of 70, and one young guy who 11 days ago now turned 50, named Naftali Bennett. And I'd known Bennett a little bit because he'd been Netanyahu's chief of staff. But we made a deal that when he would be in Jerusalem, we would sit and talk for a while. So there was a debate between the three candidates at Machon Lev, the Jerusalem College of Technology. And immediately after that, we just sat outside on the bench and talked for a couple hours in the cool August Jerusalem air that I love so much. During that time, he was mostly talking about himself and how he'll be prime minister one day. Yeah, right, Naftali. I remember he asked me a question. Do you know Yair Lapid? Now, Lapid had been an anchor man. He had just entered politics 3 weeks earlier, on the 1st of August, 2012. And I had this get to know you meeting the Friday before at his house in Tel Aviv. He's got this man cave there with boxing gloves. He worships Muhammad Ali. And I talked to him for like 4 hours that day. And I said to Bennett, you know what? Not only do I know Lapid, I think the two of you would get along very well. I think you would make good friends. And he looks at me and he says, really? Can I have his phone number? And I gave him Lapid's phone number. And that kind of led to the government that was formed a few months ago and the government that was formed in June now. I made the political shidduch. And I'm told that if I make 2 more political shidduchs, I can get into heaven automatically. Though there are those who say I actually would go somewhere. Depending on who it is. So the third thing that we thought ended the political crisis was diversity. Forming a government unprecedentedly diverse, the most diverse government not only in Israel's history, but perhaps in the history of mankind on the face of this earth. With right wing and left wing and centrists together, very orthodox and very secular and everywhere in between, LGBT and anti-homophobic, all together. And of course, an Islamic fundamentalist party for the first time. This would be the equivalent of America having a ticket of AOC and Ted Cruz. Or if the people who invaded the Capitol that day just got together with a squad and said, let's think about what we have in common and run this country together. And I laughed at this, but Tom Friedman wrote in the New York Times that this is the model for America, that Americans need to learn from Israel how to deal with political crises with diversity. It's nice if it would have worked, but it's not working. All it took when you've got a narrow majority of 61 to 59 was one person to come under tremendous amount of pressure. And that is what happened to Idit Silman, the chairwoman of the coalition, the person whose job it was to keep the coalition together, admitted that she is a complete total failure by going to the other side and saying she can't take it anymore. She can't take the pressure that came from her own husband, writing in social media and giving interviews all the time, talking about how terrible his wife's decision was. Who could endure such a thing? She was promised by Netanyahu to be health minister in a government that he'll form in the future whenever and be number 10 on the Likud's next list. Okay, so that's made it 60-60 or 60-54-6 if you don't count the Arabs. It's complicated. It's complicated. A lot of different things could happen. According to the latest polls, a majority of the people would rather see a new government form with the current Knesset. There are 80 right-wing members of Knesset, plus another 8 who don't want Yair Lapid to become prime minister when the rotation is supposed to happen on the 27th of August, 2023. Netanyahu can't form a government, but everybody else in Likud could. So have somebody like Nir Barkat form a government. That would be the simplest thing to do. The second most popular thing to do is to have the current government stay anyway, somehow. And there are 20% of Israelis, I've never met any of them, who say we should go to elections. I don't know why these people like to torture political correspondents and make them not see their kids, but it could happen. It could happen by the end of the year, more likely at the beginning of next year, that we will go to an election yet again. It's hard. But meanwhile, what can they accomplish, this government as it is? There's not much, but we'll oversimplify it with the ABCs. The B is for Bibi. They can keep on keeping him out for a little bit longer. There was this fresh prince who went on TV a couple of weeks ago and talked about how love makes you do crazy things. Well, I can tell you, as someone who's covered politics for nearly 25 years, hate makes you do crazier things, like slap people on TV. when the entire world is looking at you. And so hate can keep a government together. That's the B. And that leads us to the C, when you're trying to figure out what do 8 diverse parties have in common. And C is for COVID. They are against it, all of them. So that's something that they all agree on. Great, that's an agenda. Car accidents also starts with C. They're against those too. They now have 3 things that they have in common. All right. That brings us to the letter A, if you're looking for more substance. We already mentioned 2 of them. Abraham Accords, expanding them to other countries. Great, they all agree. Israeli Arabs investing 5 billion shekels in order to improve the infrastructure in Arab communities, as I explained to Wolf Blitzer on CNN the night that our government was formed. I said, it's true. Jewish towns look better than Arab towns in Israel do, but it's not racism. It's bad politics. When the ultra-Orthodox, they're not part of the government now, they don't get. That doesn't make us against them. And the Israeli Arabs were not part of any government where they divide up the spoils in a parliamentary democracy. That's how it works. They divide up among the constituencies of the parties that are in the government. So they didn't get. Now they will. That's the letter A. There's one more A, which is American left-wing people, especially American Jews, center-left people. The consensus among those 8 parties that are part of the governing coalition is that Netanyahu neglected all the people between preaching to the converted and the unconvertible, and really focused on the hardcore Republicans, Orthodox Jews, and evangelical Christians, the low-hanging fruit. And that they have to fix this immediately because of what it says in the beginning of the book of Shmot, and I think we'll read it our Haggadah. A leader came to power who did not know Joseph. Well, that wasn't good for the Jews, right? Well, now Joseph is the leader of the free world again. And I'm sure there are very different opinions about Joseph in this room right now. But in fact, Joseph says that he has been pro-Israel for decades and cares very deeply about Israel. And he says that he had a close relationship with Golda Meir. Now, I don't know who the next Democratic president is going to be, whether it'll be in 2 years, in 6 years, in 14 years, but it won't be someone who is friends with Golda. That's for sure. And so the feeling of this government is their reason for being is to teach American progressives why being progressive means being pro-Israel. And so if you look at the government appointments, all the jobs that were ideological, they gave to right-wing people. The justice minister, the education minister, the housing minister, the interior minister, the religious affairs minister. And all the jobs that had to deal with the diaspora, they gave to center left-wing people. The foreign minister, the diaspora affairs minister, the president, his brother, the ambassador to Washington, and it was supposed to be the chairman of the Jewish Agency, if we ever get one. That's what they tried. And they also tried to reform the kashrut and the conversion and the kotel, all these things moving very slowly. One thing made it obviously much harder to improve relations with Washington, which is, of course, that their top goal right now is reaching a deal with Iran that Israelis universally oppose. My job is to write about Israelis fighting other Israelis. I have not found an Israeli who thinks that giving unlimited amounts of money to the world's top sponsor of terror is a good idea. That's hard. Look, there's different approaches to try to stop the Iran deal. There was Netanyahu's approach, of course, go to Washington and speak to Congress and get everybody riled up about it. That did not impact the deal in any way. Zero. And then there's Naftali Bennett's approach. Work behind the scenes, quietly, don't embarrass anyone. And the impact that he made with that approach on the Iran deal was zero. Nothing at all. Which sets a bad example for the future if I'm America, but whatever. So they have to think outside the box again. Invite 4 Arab foreign ministers to Israel, to the Negev. And those 4 Arab foreign ministers were really representing 6 of them. The Bahrain people were representing Saudi Arabia, and Egypt was representing Jordan, which was meeting with the Palestinians at the time. All to show the Secretary of State of the United States that he's making a very big mistake on Iran. He made a point of not talking about Iran when they left the room, but in the room, that's what they talked about. They were warning him, if you let this deal go through, a lot of people are going to die. And it's not going to be Moroccan people. It's going to be American people, and it'll be all your fault. You can stop it. You can prevent it. You can change it. You can improve it. And since then, he's spoken differently, if you've listened. He was on MSNBC last week. He said, you know what, maybe there won't be an Iran deal. Let's hope and pray. They warned him of what happened in 2012, when an American president said there's a maniacal dictator, and if he uses chemical weapons against his people, that is a red line for us. Well, Bashar al-Assad used the chemical weapons against his people, and America did nothing. And who noticed that? Putin. Putin entered Syria a year later. He entered Crimea the year after that. He entered the rest of Ukraine 8 years later. And Israel has learned lessons from the war going on in Ukraine. Number one, even though we have better relations with countries around the world than ever, we can only rely on ourselves and God. Sorry, God and ourselves. That's it. The other lesson, we have to be strong. A lot of people have been telling us for a number of years now, nowadays, weakness is strength, and strength is weakness, and social media and underdogs and things like that. No. Who told us we have to be strong? We're doing the right thing by being strong. The strongest person I have ever spoken to in my life, Vitaly Klitschko, the former world boxing heavyweight champion, who happens to now have the title of mayor of Kiev. And I interviewed him for the Jerusalem Post. He said, I tell the people of Kiev that they need to be like Israelis, because Israelis realize when you're under attack, everybody has to do their job in protecting the country. Very beautiful thing to hear, that we're the model. And there have been plenty of Israelis who have been there in Ukraine, and former IDF officers who have been helping train people there. Obviously not in an official capacity, but in a very unofficial capacity, and plenty of Israelis who have taught them a lot. While Israel has chosen officially to be a mediator for a number of reasons. Do we have any lawyers in the room? When you're looking for a mediator, you don't want to have like a high and mighty mediator. You want to have the kind of mediator who both sides really think is beholden to them secretly behind closed doors. And so that's what both sides think. The Russians think we are beholden to them because of the relationship that's been built on the border with Syria. That's been successful for 8 years. We have a deconfliction mechanism to prevent war with them when we go in to attack Iranian targets in Syria, like we did yesterday. They know about it in advance, and that mechanism prevents Russians from shooting down Israeli pilots who would then fall into Iranian hands. What do the Ukrainians have on us? Jewish guilt. Jewish guilt, being the only other Jewish president in the world, he tries to play the Jewish guilt card with mixed results. So that is reason number one why we are mediating. Reason number two is the million Russians and Ukrainians in Israel that make it sensitive. Reason number three is the 250,000 Russians and Ukrainians we would like to bring to Israel. Reason number four is the tradition of the Russian leaders that are good to the Jews, but then change their minds overnight. Reason number five is that politicians sometimes use foreign affairs to help them politically look better when they're doing terrible in the polls. I can give you examples of 7 American presidents who've done that. Let's just say Bennett, he's under my shoes right now in the polls. And that's something that helps him politically look worldly. Another reason is, of course, it's cool to be Switzerland for a change. We're so used to being on one side of the conflict. Let us finally be the Swiss. But the real reason why we are mediating is perhaps we will succeed. Wouldn't that be amazing if the Russia-Ukraine war ends in a summit in Jerusalem, out of all places, the world's most conflicted city in the history of mankind, proving its name correct? That, of course, means Yireh Shalom, we'll see peace. Please God. But meanwhile, at least we're helping the people of Ukraine, the state of Israel with 150 tons of supplies, I know your community here has raised how much money? It was on your website. A lot. Look, the Jewish Federations of North America have raised more than $80 million in the Ukraine emergency campaign. Yeah, in a month. It's very impressive. Led by Ashton Kutcher, gave a lot of them. We are doing what we can. Field hospital there in Ukraine. I myself got to see with my own eyes what's happening humanitarian-wise when I was sent to the border of Ukraine. When my editor called me up and asked me, do I want to go to the border with Ukraine? My first answer, at least in my head, was, he's trying to kill me. No way, I don't want to go there. I like my wife and children. I'm not a military reporter. I've never reported from a trench. I have a cushy job in the Knesset. I have a front row seat in the gallery of the Knesset with my name on it, overlooking the plenum. Taxpayers pay for my gym. I'm not gonna go to a war zone. And then, you know what I said? Fine, it's an experience. I'll have it, I'll come, but I won't stay for Shabbat. And so I came and I went through 4 countries to get to the Ukrainian border. And I felt like I went through a time warp into a different era that I never thought I'd see. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. My grandmother was in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen at the same time as Anne Frank. Her picture from Bergen-Belsen is on the wall at Yad Vashem. My great-grandparents were murdered by Ukrainians. And there I was on the border of Ukraine, talking to the people as they came across, watching a steady stream of mostly women and little girls and boys go across the border, little girls with pink backpacks, and talking to them about what they were experiencing before they left, why they left, what they packed, how they packed, and how long it took them to get to safety. What? Google Translate. Would speak into it, and it would spit out what they're saying in another language. It was pretty impressive. We talked to them about how they would drive. They drove for a few hours, and then they hit the traffic jam, and so they just got out of their car and walked for 7 hours to the border in the freezing cold, rain, snow, and mud. Not easy. Now, you all read what Natan Sharansky wrote. He actually wrote in his book a couple of years ago, just went viral a month ago, about when he was growing up in Donetsk in Crimea. He had no idea what it meant to be a Jew. He just knew that because it said Jew on his identity card, he would get beaten up. And that nowadays, it's different, that if you've got Jew on your identity card in Ukraine, even if you don't know what it means to be a Jew, you know that it means that somebody's going to help you and take care of you. It's very beautiful. Too bad it's only half true. The people of Israel, you know, we've been helping a lot, but we've got our share of bureaucracy and hurdles and obstacles. We're not angels. And the Goyim, they're not so bad. The Goyim, I got to see how the Moldovan people would go to the border with an empty van and just tell strangers, refugees, we'll take you anywhere in Europe. Where do you want to go? You need a place to stay, come to my house. The restaurants were free for Ukrainian refugees. The museums were free. The taxis were free. Work permits without papers, no problem. And it wasn't, I know that happened to a few different countries all around Ukraine. It's not the Shoah. People are really helping people. That's Gentiles helping Gentiles. I got to see Jews help Gentiles. The first tent across the border from Ukraine and Moldova is Israel Aid, an organization that whenever there's a crisis around the world, they show up helping people. It was a tent full of baby food, diapers, games, and toys for young mothers to have a safe space when they cross that border. Very nice, beautiful thing. I got to see the way the Gentiles were helping the Jews. I was brought there by the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. They're the ones who funded my trip. And I got to see how they built this refugee camp out of nothing to use as a place for people to come and stay on their way from Ukraine to make Aliyah to Israel. I met very special people there. there was a man there named Vladimir Zev Wolf, which basically means in 3 different languages, wolf, wolf, wolf. And I talked to him. He said he's never left Odessa before. He's 7 years old. And here he is making Aliyah. I asked him, who are you moving to Israel with? And his answer was, with my dog and my wife. You don't forget an answer like that. There was this woman named Anna Galanshkanaya who said that when she was 9 years old, her father put her in a horse-drawn wagon and just started riding straight east to get away from the Nazis. They rode into the Ural Mountains in Russia. And she couldn't have dreamed back then that 80 years later, she'd be fleeing the other way to the west to get away from the Russians. Incredible. Then I saw on Shabbat, I did stay for Shabbat, I'm glad I did, the way the Jews were helping the Jews. In Kishinev, Moldova, there are 2 synagogues, both of them Orthodox, and they don't talk to each other or cooperate in any way. Could you believe it, that such a thing would happen? I went on Friday night first to the regular Orthodox synagogue. I saw this very frum rabbi from Baybrock, with a beard and a black hat, who the entire Shabbat did not put down his phone. He drove back after dinner to the border with Ukraine again. He showed me under the ark, I guess because he had the best locks there, he had what he called these jammers that they used to mess up the Ukrainian computer system to help get men out. He bribed people on Shabbat. He cooked for people on Shabbat. That list of mitzvot that they have there, malachot, he did all of them on Shabbat. It was really beautiful to see the pikuach nefesh in play. And then the following day, I went back there for Shacharit and saw he was still doing it. I went there for Shacharit because the Chabad, which is the other shul, started their Shacharit at 10:30, and it was past Mount Tefillah. So I went there only from Torah reading and beyond. And I got there and I saw who's being called up to the Torah. Big rabbi after big rabbi after big rabbi from Ukraine. People who helped take out their entire community of hundreds of people. And then they were the last ones to leave, taking the Torah scrolls with them and locking the door, having no idea if they'd come back. Really amazing people. They each got called up one by one, and they each said a gomel. Now, we have gotten used to making fun of a gomel, right? A gomel is supposed to be something for saving lives, but it says that you have to say it also if you go on a transatlantic flight. So you see somebody in Israel get an aliyah, and say Hagomel, and you think, oh my God, what did you go through? And they answer, oh, I went to Florida. But here, this was real Hagomel, all of them. And I got the last Aliyah in the book of Exodus, and I felt, wow, I don't deserve this. Why am I getting this? I had to think about it. And then I went outside, the service ended, to the Kiddush in the freezing cold, with very meager food. And I was really hoping it would go very quick because I had better food from Israel back in my hotel. And sure enough, these Chabad rabbis get up and dance. And I thought, oy vey, why did I go to Chabad? And then I listened to what they were singing when they were dancing. V'samachta b'chagecha. And I thought, this is weird. I went up to the rabbi from Kharkiv. Rabbi, did you start Purim or Pesach early? And he said, no. It's like a kid who has a piece of candy. And he really wants the candy. But his father won't let him have it. So, smart kid, he makes a bracha on the candy. So his father will have to give it to him. He can't say God's name in vain. So that's what they were doing. They were pushing God to turn their tragedy into joy, showing tremendous emunah. I was so impressed. The following day, I came back to Israel on a plane full of refugees from Ukraine. I sat next to the consul from Ukraine, and he showed me a text message from the chief rabbi of Odessa, who said, "I've now crossed the border. Thank you for saving my life." And I saw the time on it, 2 hours into Shabbat. Now, I've learned about pikuach nefesh. I know you could cook. I didn't know that you could send a text message saying thank you, but it was really beautiful. And it made me think about why I got that aliyah, the last aliyah in the book of Exodus. I realized, you know what? I've gone through an Exodus myself. Never going to complain about it being cold anymore. Never going to complain about being hungry too much. I am looking at the world in a different kind of way. I'm never going to look at the nitpicking that these people do, bringing chametz in Arab sandwiches, and Arabs bringing sandwiches into a hospital on Pesach. Sorry. And I learned another P, which is perspective. And I really got to see how Hashem helps Israel defeat any challenge, whether it's peace, politics, Putin, piguim, a pandemic. And I hope Hashem will help the people of Ukraine and also America. Thank you very much. And this is a time that you can feel free to ask anything about anything I brought up, anything that I didn't bring up. Lisa, you can feel free to call on people or whatever.
Oh, no, you call. I'm just
Okay.
starting the recording.
You know everybody's name. Yes. People should say their name before they ask a question.
Ronnie Dodd.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's any answer to this, because such an old problem. One thing you didn't speak about is the figuring, but I don't know if there's anything anybody can do about it.